I thought coming home from my first vacation in 20 years would be the perfect ending to a wonderful trip until I found 17 black garbage bags lined up on my front porch, like a funeral procession. My hands trembled as I read the note taped to my own front door. Sorry, Mom. No space for you. Derek. The key that had opened this lock for 35 years suddenly felt foreign in my fingers. Through the living room window, I watched my daughter-in-law rearranging my furniture while my grandson played in what used to be my sewing room. Standing on that porch with my suitcase in one hand and that devastating note in the other, I felt my world collapse like a house of cards. The European river cruise had been my gift to myself after 5 years of widowhood, my first real indulgence since my husband passed. I had saved for 2 years to afford it, cutting coupons and skipping meals out just to experience something beautiful again. My phone buzzed with 17 missed calls, all from Derek. I dialed his number with shaking fingers, and he answered on the first ring. Mom, thank God. Where have you been? I tried calling you all week. Derek, what is this? Why are my belongings on the porch? What does this note mean? His voice carried that uncomfortable tone I remembered from his teenage years when he had been caught doing something wrong. Look, Mom, we need to talk. Brenda's pregnant again, and we desperately need more space. The baby's coming in 6 months, and Tyler needs a proper bedroom instead of sharing with us. I sank onto my porch steps surrounded by garbage bags containing my life. But Derek, this is my house. I don't understand. Actually, Mom, remember when you had pneumonia 3 years ago? You added my name to the deed so I could handle things if you got sicker. My lawyer says that gives me legal rights here. We talked about this. My mind raced back to that awful winter when I had been bedridden for weeks. Derek had been so helpful bringing me soup and handling my paperwork while I recovered. I remembered signing several documents, but I thought they were just medical power of attorney forms in case I needed surgery. Derek, I thought those papers were just for medical decisions. This is the house your grandfather built where you grew up. I know, Mom, and I'm sorry. But we consulted with a lawyer, and since both our names are on the deed, we have the right to live here. You can find a nice apartment somewhere. Maybe one of those senior communities with activities and stuff. The casual way he dismissed 67 years of my life in this house made my stomach turn. This was where I had brought him home from the hospital as a newborn, where I had nursed him through chicken pox and helped him with homework at the kitchen table I had inherited from my mother. But Derek, I've been paying the mortgage, the utilities, the groceries. I paid off your credit card debt when you moved in. That was $30,000. And your student loans another $42,000. I thought I was helping you get back on your feet. And we appreciate that, Mom, we really do. But things change. Brenda and I have been talking, and we think this arrangement will work better for everyone. Mrs. Patterson, my 75-year-old neighbor, emerged from her house with a concerned expression. She had been watching the drama unfold from her kitchen window. Holly, dear, are you all right? Derek told us about your condition, and we've all been so worried. I looked up at her, confused. My condition. Mrs. Patterson's weathered face crumpled with sympathy. The dementia, sweetheart. Derek explained how it's been getting worse and how hard this has been on his family. He said you've been having episodes where you forget things and get confused. We think he's being so brave taking care of you and little Tyler at the same time. My blood turned to ice water. Mrs. Patterson, I don't have dementia. I just returned from a 2-week cruise through Europe. I managed my passport, my flight's foreign currency, and navigated 4 different countries by myself. She patted my arm gently the way you might comfort someone who was clearly delusional. Oh, honey, I know it's hard to accept. But Derek showed us the incidents he's been documenting. The time you left the stove on and nearly started a fire. When you got lost driving to Miller's Grocery and the police had to bring you home. How you forgot Tyler's name last month and called him by your late husband's name instead. None of these things had ever happened. I stared at Mrs. Patterson, realizing that my son had been systematically destroying my reputation in my own neighborhood. Every person I had known for decades now believed I was mentally incompetent. Mrs. Patterson, none of that is true. I've never left the stove on, I've never gotten lost going to Miller's, and I would never forget my grandson's name. She squeezed my shoulder with genuine compassion. Derek said you might not remember these episodes. That's part of the condition, dear. Memory loss, about the memory loss itself. As Mrs. Patterson walked back to her house, shaking her head sadly, I sat surrounded by my bagged-up life and realized I was facing something far worse than homelessness. My son had declared war on my very identity. I loaded my suitcase and 2 of the lighter garbage bags into my car and drove the 23 miles to my sister Janet's house in Millbrook. Janet had always been the practical one between us, working her way up to loan officer at First National Bank through sheer determination and financial savvy. If anyone could help me make sense of this nightmare, it would be her. Janet answered the door in her gardening clothes soil, still clinging to her gloves. Her face lit up when she saw me, then immediately clouded with concern when she noticed my expression. "Holly, what's wrong? You look terrible. How was your cruise?" "The cruise was wonderful. Coming home has been hell." I collapsed into her familiar kitchen chair and told her everything that had transpired in the last 3 hours. Janet's face grew darker with each detail. When I finished, she walked to her kitchen drawer and pulled out a manila folder. "Holly, I need to show you something that's been bothering me for months." She spread out printed text messages and call logs on her kitchen table. "Derek has been calling me regularly since January, expressing concerns about your mental health. Look at this." I read the messages with growing horror. Derek had texted Janet detailed accounts of incidents that had never occurred. According to his fabricated timeline, I had left my car running in the driveway all night in February. In March, I had supposedly called him at 3 a.m. asking where I was, even though I was in my own bedroom. In April, he claimed I had invited strangers into my house thinking they were family members. "Janet, none of this happened. I've never done any of these things." "I know that now, but at the time I was genuinely worried. Derek asked me not to visit because he said sudden changes in routine agitate people with dementia. He said my presence might confuse you more." I felt sick realizing how thoroughly Derek had isolated me. "What else did he say?" Janet pulled out more papers. "He's been asking detailed questions about your finances. Last month, he wanted to know about your will, whether you had ever mentioned changing beneficiaries on your retirement accounts, and whether I thought you were still mentally competent to make financial decisions." The pattern became crystal clear. Derek had not just stolen my home, he was systematically laying the groundwork to steal everything I owned. "Janet, I need to check something." I opened my purse and pulled out the stack of mail I had collected from my post office box before going on vacation. I always had my important mail held when traveling, but Derek didn't know about the post office box. It was a habit I had developed years ago when I wanted to surprise my late husband with purchases he wouldn't see coming. As I sorted through the mail, my hands began trembling. 3 bank statements were missing from what should have been there. My investment company statement was also absent, along with correspondence from my insurance company. "He's been intercepting my mail," I whispered. Janet grabbed my hands. "Holly, this is elder fraud. Derek is committing multiple crimes against you." I pulled out my phone and opened my credit monitoring app. There were 3 credit inquiries I had never authorized, all in the past 2 months. Derek had been using my personal information to apply for credit cards while I was planning my vacation. "Janet, he's been calling my doctor too, hasn't he?" She nodded grimly. "Dr. Martinez's office called me 2 weeks ago, asking if I had noticed any changes in your behavior." They said a family member had expressed concerns about your cognitive abilities. My son had been busy while I was seeing the Rhine Valley and touring ancient castles. He had spent those 2 weeks poisoning every important relationship in my life, from my neighbors to my medical professionals to my own sister. There's something else, Janet said quietly. Tom Bradley from your street called me yesterday. Derek told him you've been having episodes where you don't recognize familiar people. Tom said Derek seemed really broken up about it, talking about how difficult it is to watch a parent deteriorate. I laughed bitterly. Derek deserves an Academy Award for his performance. He's been planning this for months, maybe longer. Janet stood up and paced her kitchen. Holly, you need legal help. This isn't just family drama anymore. This is criminal conspiracy. As I sat in Janet's kitchen surrounded by evidence of my son's elaborate deception, I realized something important. Derek had made one crucial mistake in his plan. He had assumed I was the same trusting, naive woman who had raised him. But losing my husband had taught me hard lessons about protecting myself. I had resources Derek knew nothing about, and I was about to become his worst nightmare. The next morning, I drove Janet across town to show her my secret. We pulled into the parking lot of Maple Grove Apartments, a modest 4-unit building tucked behind a row of mature oak trees. Janet stared at the property in confusion. Holly, why are we here? I smiled for the first time in 48 hours. Because this is mine. Janet's eyes widened. What do you mean, yours? I inherited this building from Aunt Margaret 15 years ago. Remember how she always said she wanted to leave something meaningful to family? Well, this was it. I never told Derek because Robert always advised keeping some assets private just in case life took unexpected turns. I led Janet around the building explaining how I had quietly managed the property for years. I have 4 units. Margaret Chen, a retired nurse, lives in 2A. Robert and Linda Thompson, a lovely elderly couple, live in 2B. Carlos Mendoza, a young father who works as a paralegal, lives in 1B, and Unit 1A has been vacant while I've been renovating it. Janet examined the building with her banker's eye. Holly, this property must be worth at least $400,000, probably more with the renovations. The rental income has been my security blanket for 15 years, about $3,800 a month after expenses. I've been using it to supplement my teacher's pension and save for things like my cruise. I unlocked Unit 1A and showed Janet inside. The apartment was nearly complete with fresh paint, new appliances, and hardwood floors. I had been refinishing myself over the past year. I originally planned to rent this unit, but now I think it's going to be my new home. Janet walked through the spacious rooms. Derek has no idea this exists. None whatsoever. Robert and I agreed early in our marriage that we would each maintain some financial independence. When Aunt Margaret left me this building, I saw it as my insurance policy against exactly this kind of situation. We heard footsteps on the stairs, and Margaret Chen appeared at my open door. Margaret was 63 with sharp eyes and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who had spent 40 years dealing with medical emergencies. Holly, I heard voices. Is everything all right? You look upset. I introduced Janet and explained my situation. Margaret's expression grew increasingly angry as I described Derek's scheme. That's elder abuse, plain and simple. I've seen it too many times in my nursing career. Family members who view elderly relatives as assets to be liquidated rather than people to be loved. Margaret, I need to ask you and the other tenants for a huge favor. I'm going to be moving into 1A temporarily, and I need everyone to keep my presence here absolutely confidential. Derek can't know I have anywhere safe to go. Margaret crossed her arms. Consider it done. Robert and Linda will be thrilled to help, and Carlos will too. We've all grown fond of you over the years. You're the best landlord any of us have ever had. Over the next few hours, I moved my most important belongings into my hidden apartment. Janet helped me set up a secure workspace where I could begin documenting Derek's crimes. That evening, Carlos knocked on my door. He was 28 with kind eyes and the careful manner of someone who understood legal complexities. Mrs. Holly Margaret told me what happened. I work for Goldman and Associates downtown. We handle a lot of elder fraud cases. Would you like me to ask my boss if she might be interested in your situation? Carlos, I would be incredibly grateful. He pulled out his phone and showed me Derek's work. I did some preliminary research this afternoon. The documents you signed during your pneumonia, if you weren't properly informed about what you were signing, and if Derek misrepresented their purpose, that could constitute fraud. Adding his name to your deed under false pretenses might be enough to void those changes. For the first time since reading that devastating note, I felt hope stirring in my chest. There's something else, Carlos continued. Margaret mentioned you think Derek has been accessing your bank accounts. Have you checked your statements recently? I pulled out my laptop and logged into my banking portal. What I found made my hands shake with rage. Derek had been making electronic transfers from my savings account to his checking account, starting small with $200 in March, then growing bolder. Last week, while I was enjoying European museums, he had transferred $1,500. Carlos, he's been stealing from me for months. Mrs. Holly, you need to call the bank first thing tomorrow and report unauthorized access. Then we need to document everything before Derek realizes you're onto him. As I settled into my hidden apartment that night, I realized Derek had underestimated me in every possible way. He thought I was a helpless old woman with nowhere to turn. Instead, he had awakened a retired school teacher who had spent 40 years dealing with manipulative children and their schemes. The student was about to learn a lesson he would never forget. The next morning, I called my bank and discovered something that made my blood boil. Derek had not only been withdrawing money from my accounts, he had also been inquiring about my investment portfolios and retirement funds. The customer service representative mentioned that your son had called 3 times asking about procedures for transferring assets for elderly parents who were no longer capable of managing their own finances. Derek wasn't just stealing my house and my money. He was laying the groundwork to steal my entire life's work. Over the following week, I transformed into someone I had never imagined becoming: a detective investigating my own family. Margaret, with her medical background, helped me understand the psychological aspects of what Derek was doing. Financial abuse of elderly parents is more common than people realize, she explained as we reviewed bank statements in my apartment. The perpetrators often start by convincing themselves they're helping, then gradually shift to feeling entitled to their parents' assets. I had Carlos help me install a discreet security camera system that could monitor the street in front of my house. We positioned one camera in Mrs. Patterson's old oak tree with her unwitting help, telling her it was for neighborhood security. What I discovered through surveillance was worse than I had imagined. Derek and Brenda were bringing strangers through my house almost daily, conducting unauthorized showings as if it were already theirs to sell. On Wednesday afternoon, I watched through the camera feed as Derek led a young couple through my front yard, gesturing expansively toward the flower beds I had tended for 35 years. I drove over and parked across the street close enough to hear their conversation through my car window. The current occupant has already moved to an assisted living facility, Derek was telling the potential buyers. We're looking to close quickly, so the price is definitely negotiable. My mother is elderly and just wants this settled without complications. The woman asked, "What kind of timeline are we looking at?" "I have full power of attorney and authority to handle all paperwork," Derek replied confidently. "We could probably close within 30 days if you're serious." I recorded every word on my phone while sitting in my car like a private investigator. Derek was not only lying about my mental state, He was misrepresenting his legal authority and actively marketing my property without my knowledge or consent. That evening, Carlos brought disturbing news from his research. "Mrs. Holly, I found online listings for some items that look familiar." He showed me his laptop screen. Brenda had been selling my possessions on multiple platforms. My mother's pearl necklace was listed for $800. The antique china cabinet that had belonged to my grandmother was being sold for $1,200. Most heartbreaking was my mother's engagement ring listed as estate jewelry from elderly family member for $1,500. "They're liquidating everything I own," I whispered. "The good news is we have screenshots of everything, including the seller's profile. This establishes a pattern of theft that goes beyond just the bank account access." Margaret knocked on my door with her own intelligence. "Holly, I was at Miller's grocery today and overheard Brenda talking to the pharmacist. She was asking about medications for dementia patients and whether certain prescriptions could cause confusion or memory loss." My spine went cold. "What kind of questions?" "She wanted to know if someone could slip medication into food or drinks, and whether there were drugs that could make people seem confused or disoriented." The pharmacist thought she was asking for a relative, so he gave her some general information about side effects. The picture became crystal clear. Derek and Brenda weren't just stealing my assets and ruining my reputation. They were researching ways to actually make me appear mentally incompetent. "Margaret, they're planning to drug me." "That's exactly what I'm afraid of. We need to move faster." Carlos had more alarming news. "My boss, Sarah Goldman, reviewed your case and wants to meet with you tomorrow. But there's something urgent we discovered. Derek has scheduled an appointment with Dr. Whitmore, a psychiatrist who specializes in geriatric mental health evaluations." "What kind of evaluation?" "The kind that could legally declare you mentally incompetent. The appointment is scheduled for next Friday. According to the paperwork Derek filed, you've been having severe cognitive decline and need professional assessment for your own safety." I realized Derek's timeline was accelerating. He was planning to have me declared legally incompetent within days, which would give him complete control over all my assets and decisions. "Carlos, how long do we have?" "Not long. Once a court-appointed psychiatrist declares someone incompetent, reversing that decision can take months or years, even with evidence of fraud. We need to act before that evaluation happens." That night, I lay awake in my hidden apartment listening to the sounds of my tenants living their normal lives around me. Robert and Linda were watching television. Carlos was helping his daughter with homework. Margaret was reading in her bedroom. These people had welcomed me into their community without knowing they were providing sanctuary for a woman whose own son was trying to destroy her life. Their loyalty gave me strength for what I had to do next. Derek thought he was playing chess while I was playing checkers. Tomorrow he was going to discover that his mother had learned some new games while he wasn't paying attention. Sarah Goldman's law office occupied the top floor of a restored Victorian building downtown. At 55, she had the sharp, confident bearing of someone who had built her reputation fighting for people who couldn't fight for themselves. "Mrs. Holly, what your son is doing constitutes multiple felonies," Sarah said after reviewing my evidence. "Identity theft, elder fraud forgery, wire fraud, and potentially criminal conspiracy. The fact that he's been planning this systematically for months makes it even more serious." She spread out documents across her conference table. "The good news is that we have excellent evidence. Your bank records show unauthorized access. The real estate listings prove he's attempting to sell property he doesn't legally own. The online sales of your belongings establish theft. And the surveillance footage of him conducting unauthorized showings demonstrates intent to defraud. What about the deed he claims gives him ownership?" Sarah smiled grimly. "I had my paralegal research the documents you signed during your pneumonia." Derek filed a quit claim deed adding his name to your property, but there's a problem with his paperwork. Under New York state law, any significant property transfer involving someone over 65 requires either independent legal representation or a waiting period to prevent exactly this kind of fraud. What does that mean? It means Derek's claim to your house is legally invalid. He misrepresented the documents you signed, you weren't properly informed of their implications, and the transfer doesn't meet state requirements for elderly persons. We can void it entirely. I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. So I can get my house back? Absolutely. But we're going to do something better than just reclaim your property. We're going to make sure Derek faces criminal consequences for what he's done to you. Sarah explained our strategy. First, we're going to have you undergo comprehensive cognitive testing with Dr. Patricia Williams, an independent neurologist who specializes in dementia cases. She'll provide documentation that you're completely mentally competent. What about the evaluation Derek scheduled? Dr. Whitmore is actually under investigation by the State Medical Board for conducting questionable competency evaluations. Several of his assessments have been overturned by courts. Derek chose him specifically because of his reputation for finding elderly people incompetent based on minimal evidence. Sarah's team had uncovered Derek's entire network. The financial advisor Derek has been working with, Michael Torres, specializes in what he calls elder care transitions. He's been investigated twice for helping families gain access to elderly relatives' assets under questionable circumstances. Over the next 3 days, I underwent the most thorough mental health evaluation of my life. Dr. Williams administered cognitive tests, memory assessments, and psychological evaluations. The results were unambiguous. Mrs. Hawley, you show no signs whatsoever of cognitive decline, dementia, or mental incompetence, Dr. Williams told me. Your test scores are actually above average for your age group. You're sharper than most people 20 years younger. Dr. Williams provided detailed written testimony about my mental competence, including comparative analysis, showing how my cognitive abilities had remained stable over the past 5 years based on my medical records. Meanwhile, Carlos and his colleagues gathered additional evidence. They discovered Derek had been systematically researching elder fraud techniques online, including searches for how to gain power of attorney from elderly parent and legal ways to access parents' retirement accounts. Most damning was an email trail between Derek and Brenda that Carlos found on Derek's work computer. In these messages, they discussed their timeline for getting mom out of the house and accessing her accounts before she realizes what's happening. Mrs. Hawley, this email evidence shows premeditation and conspiracy, Sarah explained. Derek and Brenda planned this together, which elevates the charges significantly. Sarah had also discovered the extent of Derek's financial crimes. He's stolen $87,000 from you over the past 18 months through various methods: forged checks, unauthorized electronic transfers, credit card applications using your information, and even a small loan he took out using your house as collateral without your knowledge. How did he get away with all this? Because you trusted him, and because he was smart about starting small and escalating gradually. Classic financial abuse pattern. He tested the waters to see if anyone would notice, then got bolder when nothing happened. The final piece of our strategy involved setting a trap. Sarah arranged for Derek to proceed with his planned family meeting, where he intended to present his case for having me declared incompetent and moved into supervised care. We're going to let Derek walk into our trap, Sarah explained. He's planning to ambush you with his fabricated evidence and his corrupt psychiatrist. Instead, he's going to find himself facing criminal charges. I spent the weekend before the confrontation practicing staying calm under pressure. Margaret helped me rehearse difficult conversations, while Carlos briefed me on legal terminology I might need to understand. On Sunday afternoon, I received an unexpected visitor. Mrs. Patterson knocked on my apartment door looking confused and upset. "Holly, dear, I need to apologize. Something very strange happened yesterday." She explained that Derek had approached her asking for a written statement about my episodes to present to a judge. When Mrs. Patterson tried to recall specific incidents, she realized she had never actually witnessed any of the events Derek had described to her. "I think Derek has been lying to all of us," she said quietly. "You seem perfectly fine to me, and you always have. I'm so sorry I believed those stories." Word was spreading through my neighborhood as other residents began questioning Derek's claims. Tom Bradley had started asking himself why he had never personally witnessed any of my supposed confusion. Betty Morrison remembered that Derek's stories about my behavior never quite added up. My community was waking up to the truth just in time for Derek to face the consequences of his deception. On Monday morning, as I prepared for the confrontation that would determine my future, I reflected on how much I had changed in just 2 weeks. I had gone from victim to strategist, from isolated target, to someone with a team of allies fighting alongside me. Derek was about to learn that the woman he had tried to destroy was stronger, smarter, and more resourceful than he had ever imagined. Derek had arranged the family meeting for Wednesday afternoon at my house, which he now considered his domain. He had invited Tyler specifically to make me feel guilty about disrupting his home, and he planned to present his case for moving me into supervised care with the authority of someone who had already won. I arrived at exactly 3 o'clock, accompanied by Sarah Goldman and Detective Maria Santos from the County Sheriff's Economic Crimes Unit. Derek and Brenda were waiting in my living room with Tyler, along with the fraudulent psychiatrist Dr. Whitmore and financial advisor Michael Torres. Derek's face went pale when he saw my legal team, but he tried to maintain his composure. "Mom, I'm glad you could make it. We have some important decisions to discuss about your care." "Actually, Derek, I think you're the one who needs to be concerned about care," I replied calmly. "Specifically the care you're going to receive in the county jail." Sarah stepped forward and placed a recording device on my coffee table. "Derek Sullivan, you're being recorded. This meeting is part of an ongoing criminal investigation into elder fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy." The color drained completely from Derek's face. Brenda grabbed his arm, whispering urgently in his ear. "I don't understand," Derek stammered. "Mom, what's going on? We're here to help you." I looked at my son with a mixture of sadness and determination. "Derek, I know about everything. The forged signatures, the stolen money, the fake dementia stories, the unauthorized house showings, Brenda selling my belongings online, and your plan to have me declared incompetent by a corrupt psychiatrist." Dr. Whitmore stood up abruptly. "I think there's been some misunderstanding. I was asked here to conduct a routine evaluation." Detective Santos addressed him directly. "Dr. Whitmore, you're currently under investigation by the State Medical Board for conducting fraudulent competency evaluations. I'd recommend you leave immediately if you don't want to become part of this criminal case." The psychiatrist gathered his papers and fled without another word, leaving Derek and Brenda looking utterly panicked. Sarah began presenting evidence methodically. "Derek, we have documentation of unauthorized access to your mother's bank accounts, totaling $87,000 in stolen funds. We have recordings of you conducting illegal showings of property you don't own. We have screenshots of your wife selling your mother's belongings without permission." She played audio recordings from my surveillance equipment where Derek explicitly discussed deceiving me and accessing my assets. His own voice filled my living room. "Mom's too trusting to figure it out until it's too late. By the time she realizes what happened, we'll have everything transferred and there won't be anything she can do about it." Brenda's face crumpled as she realized the extent of the evidence against them. "Derek, you said this was legal. You said your mom gave you permission." I never gave permission for any of this, I said firmly. Derek, you stole my house through fraud. You've been stealing my money for months, and you've been planning to drug me to make me appear incompetent. Derek's composure finally broke completely. Mom, you don't understand. We're drowning in debt. Brenda lost her job, the baby's coming, and we needed help. You have more money than you need. So you decided to steal it instead of asking for help? We knew you'd never agree to give us the house. You're too attached to this place. But we figured if we could just get you settled somewhere nice, everyone would be better off. Sarah interrupted. Derek, you're confessing to multiple felonies. I'd strongly advise you to stop talking. Detective Santos stepped forward with handcuffs. Derek Sullivan, you're under arrest for elder fraud, identity theft, wire fraud, and conspiracy. Brenda Sullivan, you're under arrest as an accessory to these crimes. Tyler, who had been sitting quietly on the couch playing with his tablet, suddenly looked up as his parents were handcuffed. Grandma Holly, what's happening? Why are the police taking Mommy and Daddy? My heart broke for my grandson, who was completely innocent in all of this. I knelt down to his level and spoke gently. Tyler, your parents made some very serious mistakes with Grandma's money and house. They have to go with the police officers to talk about what they did wrong. Are you okay, Grandma? I'm going to be fine, sweetheart, and I'm going to make sure you're okay too. As Derek was led toward the police car, he turned back to me with desperation in his eyes. Mom, please don't do this. Think about Tyler. Think about our family. I looked at my son, the child I had raised and sacrificed for and loved unconditionally for 32 years. Derek, I am thinking about our family. That's exactly why I'm doing this. You need to learn that there are consequences for betraying the people who love you. Detective Santos informed me that the financial advisor Michael Torres was also being arrested at his office for his role in the conspiracy. The entire network Derek had assembled was being dismantled. After the police left, I sat in my living room surrounded by the evidence of Derek's deception. Sarah helped me understand what would happen next. Derek will likely plead guilty to avoid a trial, especially with this much evidence. He's looking at significant prison time, probably 2 to 3 years. Brenda might get probation if she cooperates fully with prosecutors and makes restitution. What about Tyler? Child Services will need to place him temporarily. Do you want to petition for custody? I looked around the house where Derek and Brenda had tried to erase me. Yes. This is Tyler's home too, and he's the only innocent person in this whole mess. As evening fell, I walked through my reclaimed house, touching familiar objects and remembering better times. Tomorrow, I would begin the process of rebuilding trust with my grandson and creating a new kind of family from the wreckage of the old one. Derek had taught me a painful lesson about the difference between helping family and enabling their worst instincts. Now it was time for me to teach Tyler a better lesson about integrity, consequences, and what real family love actually looks like. 6 months later, I sat in my garden watching Tyler help me plant tomatoes for the summer season. My grandson had adjusted to living with me better than anyone had expected, and his presence had filled my house with laughter and purpose again. Derek had pleaded guilty to all charges and received a 3-year prison sentence. The judge had been particularly harsh because of the systematic nature of his crimes and the vulnerability of his victim. Brenda received 18 months of probation and 800 hours of community service after cooperating fully with prosecutors and agreeing to pay complete restitution. The financial recovery had been remarkable. Sarah's legal team had not only recovered the $87,000 Derek had stolen, but also secured additional damages for emotional distress and the cost of repairing my credit and reputation. Derek's construction business assets were seized and sold to pay restitution, and the court had ordered him to continue payments after his release from prison. My house had been properly refinanced with my name as the sole owner. The fraudulent deed changes had been voided, and new legal protections were in place to prevent any future unauthorized transfers. I had also established a legitimate trust fund for Tyler's education, managed by an independent trustee who could never be influenced by family pressure. The community response had been overwhelming. Once the truth came out, neighbors who had believed Derek's lies about my mental health felt terrible about their assumptions. Mrs. Patterson had become one of my strongest allies, frequently checking on Tyler and me with genuine care rather than pity. My story had spread beyond our neighborhood through local media coverage of the criminal case. The county district attorney's office used my case as an example in their new elder fraud awareness campaign. I had started volunteering with their victim services program, helping other older adults recognize warning signs of financial abuse by family members. "Grandma Holly, why did Dad and Mom do those bad things to you?" Tyler asked one afternoon while we were working in the garden. I had dreaded this conversation but knew it was necessary. "Tyler, sometimes people make very poor choices when they're scared about money or feel like they deserve things they haven't earned. Your parents convinced themselves that taking my house and money was okay because they needed it more than I did." "But that's stealing." "Yes, sweetheart, it is. And stealing is wrong no matter who does it or why they think they need to do it." Tyler nodded seriously. "Are you still mad at them?" "I'm sad about what they did, but I'm not angry anymore. Being angry all the time would hurt me more than it would hurt them. Your dad needs to learn from his mistakes, and maybe someday our family can heal from this." I had visited Derek twice in prison. Our conversations had been difficult but necessary. Prison had stripped away his excuses and forced him to confront what he had done. He was attending counseling and had written me several letters expressing genuine remorse. "Mom, I know sorry isn't enough," he had said during our last visit. "I convinced myself I was solving problems, but I was just creating bigger ones. I don't know how to earn back your trust." "Derek, trust is rebuilt through consistent actions over time, not through words or promises. When you get out, you'll need to prove through your choices that you understand what you did wrong." Brenda's transformation had been more dramatic. Community service at a senior center had exposed her to elderly people who had been victimized by family members. She had begun attending support groups for people who had committed financial crimes against relatives. "Mrs. Holly, I want Tyler to know what we did was wrong, and I want him to respect you the way we should have," she had told me during one of our supervised visits. I was greedy and entitled, and I'm ashamed of the example we set for him. My relationship with Tyler had become the unexpected joy in this whole ordeal. At 7 years old, he was curious, intelligent, and surprisingly resilient. I had enrolled him in counseling to help him process his parents' incarceration, but he seemed to thrive with the stability and attention I could provide. "Grandma, will you teach me how to manage money when I grow up?" he asked one evening while we were doing homework together. "Of course, Tyler. Learning to handle money responsibly is one of the most important skills anyone can have." I had started giving him a small allowance tied to age-appropriate chores, teaching him to save, spend, and give to charity in balanced proportions. He was learning lessons about financial responsibility that I wished I had taught his father more effectively. My own life had expanded in unexpected directions. I was taking art classes at the community college and had joined a hiking group for active seniors. The apartment building continued providing steady income, and my tenants had become genuine friends who enriched my daily life. Margaret Chen had become like a sister to me, and we frequently traveled together to visit museums and historical sites. Carlos had introduced me to his extended family, and I had become an honorary grandmother to his children. Robert and Linda Thompson, treated me like family, and we shared weekly dinners and game nights. I had even started dating again. Paul Morrison was a retired high school principal I had met in my art class. He was a widower who understood the complexities of family relationships and the importance of maintaining independence while building new connections. Holly, you've handled this situation with more grace than anyone could have expected, Paul had told me recently. You managed to seek justice without becoming bitter, and you've created something beautiful from something terrible. The legal protections Sarah had helped me establish gave me confidence about the future. I had updated my will with explicit instructions about Tyler's care and education. All my financial accounts now required two-person authorization for significant transactions. Most importantly, I had learned to trust my instincts about people's motives and to distinguish between helping others and enabling their harmful behavior. As summer approached, I was planning to take Tyler on his first airplane trip to visit historical sites in Washington, D.C. He was excited about seeing the museums and monuments, and I was looking forward to sharing my love of learning with him. Tyler, what's the most important thing you've learned this year? I asked him one evening as we were reading together before bedtime. That families should take care of each other, but not by stealing, he said thoughtfully. And that grandmas are stronger than people think. I hugged him close, feeling grateful for the unexpected gift his presence had brought to my life. Derek's betrayal had been devastating, but it had also revealed strength I didn't know I possessed and brought people into my life who truly cared about my well-being. The experience had taught me that real security doesn't come from trusting everyone, but from knowing who deserves your trust and why. It comes from maintaining your independence while building genuine connections. Most importantly, it comes from understanding your own worth and refusing to let anyone diminish it. I learned that helping family doesn't mean sacrificing yourself or enabling their worst impulses. Real love sometimes requires setting boundaries and allowing people to face consequences for their choices. The greatest gift I could give Tyler was modeling self-respect and showing him that kindness doesn't require weakness. As I looked toward the future, I felt hopeful rather than afraid. Derek would eventually be released from prison, and our family would need to navigate rebuilding relationships from a foundation of honesty rather than manipulation. Brenda would need to earn back the right to be a full-time mother to Tyler through consistent demonstration of changed priorities and values. But regardless of how those relationships developed, I knew I had everything I needed to live a fulfilling life. I had my health, my independence, my financial security, and my self-respect. I had friends who valued me for who I am rather than what I could provide. Most importantly, I had learned that starting over at 67 wasn't an ending, but a new beginning. My story had become part of a larger conversation about protecting elderly Americans from financial abuse by family members. If sharing my experience helped even one other person recognize warning signs and seek help earlier, then something positive had emerged from Derek's betrayal. Now I want to ask you something important. Have you ever felt pressure from family members to make financial decisions that didn't feel right to you? Have you noticed elderly relatives being isolated from friends or having their mental competence questioned by family members who might benefit from that questioning? These situations are more common than most people realize, and recognizing the warning signs early can prevent devastating consequences. Trust your instincts, maintain your independence, and remember that real family love respects boundaries rather than crossing them. If this story resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe. To stay connected with more real-life experiences, share it with others who might benefit from hearing about financial abuse awareness, and comment below about your thoughts on setting healthy boundaries with family members. Thank you for listening to my journey from betrayal to empowerment. I hope my experience helps you remember that no matter what challenges life brings you, have more strength and resources than you might realize. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you can become the catalyst for the best chapter of your life. Remember, you are never too old to fight for yourself, and you are never too trusting to learn wisdom. Take care of yourselves and the people you love, and may your families be built on respect rather than exploitation.